Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Mia Chang, and today I'll be talking about something that I think many students overlook when they're thinking about graduate school applications, which is extracurricular activities. And when students think about getting into graduate school, the first things that usually come to mind are grades, GPA, or maybe standardized test scores. While those things are certainly important, they're only one piece to the puzzle. And today I want to share with you why extracurricular activities can make a huge difference in your application, what kinds of activities admissions committees actually value, and how you can start building a stronger profile, even if your university doesn't offer as many opportunities as other schools. So, throughout this presentation, I'll also share some of my own experiences, mistakes I made, and things I wish someone had told me when I was still an undergraduate student. And by the end, my goal is that every one of you leaves with a clear understanding of what graduate schools are really looking for, and hopefully some ideas you can begin applying immediately. So here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. First, I'll briefly introduce myself so you know where I'm coming from and why this topic is so important to me. Then we'll answer the question, why do extracurricular activities even matter? If grades are already important, why should admissions committees care about anything else? After that, we'll look at different kinds of extracurricular activities. And finally, we'll talk about practical ways to build a strong graduate school profile, especially if you're studying somewhere with limited resources. So, throughout the presentation, please feel free to think about your own experiences. You don't have to wait till the end to reflect. Ask yourself, what have I done so far? What opportunities have I taken advantage of? And what opportunities am I missing? So, before we dive into the topic, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Mia Cheng, and I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. My family is from Taiwan, and I am a English as a second language learner as well. I completed my bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology at Tulane University in New Orleans, and I recently completed my Master of Science in Behavioral Health. Right now, I'm serving as a Fulbright English teaching assistant here at the University of Zambia, which has been an incredible experience because I've had the opportunity to work with students from a completely different educational system and cultural background. Outside of academics, I love sports. I enjoy both playing and watching basketball, surfing, and football. I also love music and spending time with my friends. So now you might be wondering why I'm mentioning my hobbies during a presentation about graduate admissions. And the reason is that graduate schools aren't only admitting students, they're admitting people. So your hobbies, your interests, your leadership experiences, your volunteer work, these all contribute to who you are. One thing I realized during my own application process is that admissions committees wanted to understand me as a whole person, not just as a transcript. And everything I'll talk about today comes from my own experiences applying to graduate school, talking with professors, working in research labs, and now mentoring students who hope to study abroad themselves. So now that you know a little bit about me, let's start answering the main question of today's presentation. Why do extracurricular activities actually matter? When most students think about graduate school, the first thing they usually focus on is their grade point average. They think, if I can get really good grades, I'll have a strong application. And that's not completely wrong. Grades are incredibly important, and I'm definitely not here to tell you that academics don't matter. But what many students don't realize is that graduate admissions are much more competitive than simply comparing grades. Think about how many qualified students apply to graduate programs each year. Many of them have excellent grades. Many of them have strong letters of recommendation. Many of them have taken very similar classes. So, if admissions committees only looked at transcripts, it would become very difficult to distinguish one applicant from another. That's why extracurricular experiences become so valuable. They help answer questions that grades simply can't. So, before we go any further, it's important that we're all talking about the same thing. And according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, an extracurricular activity is simply an activity that falls outside of the regular curriculum. In other words, it's something you choose to do that isn't required for one of your classes. Many students hear the word extracurricular and immediately think about sports teams and student clubs. And while those certainly count, the definition is actually much broader than that. Research experience is an extracurricular, volunteering is an extracurricular, leadership positions, part-time jobs, working for an NGO, helping run a family business, tutoring, community outreach. Even organizing projects within your church or local community can be extracurricular experiences. What matters isn't the title of the activity, but what matters is what you learned from it and how it helped you grow. Admissions committees are interested in experiences that demonstrate skills, responsibility, initiative, and personal development. So, if you've ever thought, I don't really have any extracurriculars, I encourage you to think a little bit more broadly about them. You may already have valuable experiences that you just have not recognized them as extracurriculars yet. This slide is probably one of the most important concepts of today's presentation. Academics, as I mentioned before, are extremely important. Graduate schools absolutely do care about your grades. Your transcript tells admissions committees several important things. It tells them that you understand your subject. It tells them you can complete coursework successfully. It tells them you're capable of succeeding academically at the graduate level. And without a strong academic foundation, it becomes much more difficult to be a competitive applicant. However, academics are also expected. They're the baseline. Think about it this way. When a university advertises a graduate program, they're expecting applicants to have good grades. That's the minimum requirement for consideration, and the real challenge begins after that. To better understand why extracurricular activities matter, let's walk through a hypothetical example. So imagine that you're applying to your dream graduate program. There are 100 applicants competing for only 10 available spots. Naturally, every applicant wants to stand out. Now, imagine that nearly everyone applying has similar academic performance. They all have strong grades, they've taken similar classes, and they all meet the minimum admissions requirement. At this point, your grades no longer distinguish you from everyone else. Instead, admissions committees begin asking a completely different question, and they start asking who has shown leadership, who has conducted research, who has worked within their community, who's shown resilience after overcoming challenges, what has taken initiative without being required to. In other words, they begin looking beyond the transcript. Graduate schools are trying to predict which applicants are most likely to succeed, not only in their program, but also in their future careers. So, a transcript tells them what you've already accomplished academically. Extracurricular activities help them understand what kind of person you are becoming. This is why two students with nearly identical GPAs can receive very different admissions decisions. One applicant may have spent 4 years simply attending classes, while another applicant may have similar grades while also conducting research, volunteering in their community, working part-time, leading organizations, or organizing projects that demonstrate initiative. Those experiences provide evidence of qualities that admissions committees value and often become the deciding factor between applicants. So, if extracurricular activities aren't simply about filling your resume, what exactly do they demonstrate? And there are four major areas I'd like to discuss. The first is readiness. Graduate school is very different from undergraduate education. You'll often be expected to work independently, solve problems without detailed instructions, and apply what you've learned to real-world situations. Experiences like research, internships, volunteer work, or employment demonstrate that you've already begun developing those abilities. The second area is initiative and commitment. Anyone can complete required coursework because everyone has to. Extracurricular activities show what you're willing to do when nobody requires you to do it. So, choosing to volunteer every weekend, joining a research lab after class, or leading a student organization demonstrates motivation that goes way beyond simply earning grades. Admissions committees really do notice that. Third is transferable skills. Many extracurricular experiences teach skills that graduate programs value regardless of your discipline. Leadership, communication, teamwork, problem solving, time management, conflict resolution. These skills are difficult to teach inside a classroom, yet they're essential in nearly every profession. Finally, extracurricular activities demonstrate diversity of ability. Admissions committees aren't looking for students who excel in only one area. They are looking for applicants who are adaptable, well-rounded, and capable of contributing to both the academic environment and the broader university community. And when all of these qualities come together, your application becomes much stronger because it tells a complete story about who you are, not just what grades you earned. This brings us to an important trend in graduate admissions. Admissions committees today increasingly use what is called holistic admissions. Holistic admissions means evaluating the entire applicant rather than focusing exclusively on academic performance. And according to the Council of Graduate Schools, 81% of graduate admissions staff reported that they evaluate applicants using information beyond traditional academic metrics. And that means they aren't only looking at your grades, they're also considering the things I've mentioned before, your work experience, the volunteer activities, letters of recommendation, personal statements, leadership, and other non-cognitive qualities like perseverance, maturity, motivation. And you may be asking, why has this become more common? And it's because universities have realized that academic success alone doesn't necessarily predict professional success. Someone may earn outstanding grades but struggle to work on a research team. Another student may have slightly lower grades but exceptional leadership skills, research research experience, and a strong commitment to serving others. So, graduate schools are trying to identify applicants who will succeed academically while also making meaningful contributions to their profession after graduation. That's why it's so important to think about your application as a complete package rather than just focusing on a single number. So, now that we've established why extracurricular activities matter, let's talk about what actually counts. One misconception I hear quite often is that extracurricular activities are only ran through school organizations, but as we talked about, they're much broader than that. So let's dive into it. So I've organized the extracurricular activities into six general categories. The first is academic engagement. This includes things like research, tutoring, teaching assistant positions, attending conferences, academic competitions. These experiences show intellectual curiosity beyond the classroom. The second category is work experience. Many students work while completing their degrees. Employment demonstrates responsibility, professionalism, time management, and the ability to balance multiple commitments. Third is leadership and organizations. Serving as a club officer, organizing campus events, leading projects, or coordinating teams all demonstrate leadership ability. Fourth is community service and volunteering. These experiences show compassion, civic engagement, and commitment to improving your community. The fifth category involves culture and identity organizations. These groups often provide leadership opportunities while helping students support diversity, inclusion, and cultural awareness. And finally, there are your hobbies and personal interest. And this may surprise many people. Admissions committees understand that applicants are human beings. There are athletes, musicians, creative artists, coders, entrepreneurs, and these can all strengthen your application when they demonstrate commitment, discipline, or any sort of meaningful personal growth. So, I'd like to share some examples from my own journey because I think they're a good illustration of how these different categories can come together. So, during my undergraduate studies, I worked as a research assistant in a neuropsychology lab. That experience taught me how research is actually conducted outside of the classroom. I also served as a teaching assistant for undergraduate psychology courses, and teaching forced me to communicate complex concepts clearly and helped deepen my own understanding of psychology. Throughout college, I also worked while studying. Balancing employment and academics wasn't always easy, but it taught me time management, it taught me responsibility, and it also taught me a sense of professionalism. In terms of leadership, I worked as a director's assistant for a music therapy group and later served as a health equity strategist for a nonprofit organization in Arusha, Tanzania. And those experiences allowed me to work with diverse populations while developing leadership and project management skills. Community service was another important part of my undergraduate experience. I joined Alpha Phi Omega, which is a community service fraternity, and volunteered more than 50 hours every semester. Those volunteer experiences taught me just as much outside the classroom as some of my academic courses actually did. I also participated in organizations connected to my identity, including the Asian American Student Union and programs supporting first generation college students. These communities helped me develop personally while providing opportunities for leadership, support, and advocacy. And finally, I made time for hobbies. I played club basketball and volunteered with Tulane University's Special Olympics program. And these activities weren't directly related to psychology, but they demonstrated teamwork, commitment, and balance. When I eventually applied to graduate school, I realized something really important. And it wasn't that a single activity got me accepted, it was the combination of all of these experiences that completed the photo of who I was. One of the biggest mistakes students make in choosing extracurricular activities is simply because they think that they'll look impressive on an application. Admissions committees can usually recognize when someone has joined an organization just to fill space on a resume. Instead, every experience should have a purpose. When I chose my extracurricular activities, I always tried to ask myself why I wanted to do them. For example, I want to research this topic because, or I want to work in this organization because, I want to volunteer with this community because, I want to gain experience in this field because. Notice that every one of those statements begins with a purpose. That purpose is what creates a coherent application. And if someone looked at all of my extracurricular activities together, they would notice a pattern: psychology, behavioral health, community engagement, research, education. And those experiences weren't random. They all supported the same long-term goal that I had. And that's exactly what graduate admissions committees want to see. They don't expect you to have your entire career figured out, but they do want evidence that you're intentionally building experiences that move you towards your goals. When your experiences connect together, your application becomes much more convincing because it tells one consistent story instead of many unrelated ones. So far, I've shared what I did during my undergraduate years, but I also wanted to be honest about things I wish I had done differently. Looking back, there are three major things I would change if I could start over. The first is that I wish I had asked professors about research opportunities much earlier. When I first started university, I was waiting for professors to approach students if they needed help, and that almost never happens. Most professors are incredibly busy. They teach their classes, they conduct research, they supervise graduate students, and they attend conferences. They're not just going to walk into class and ask, "Who wants to join my research lab?" Instead, the students who gain those opportunities are usually the ones who ask. And I wish someone had told me during my first year that sending one email could completely change my undergraduate experience. Even if a professor doesn't currently have a position available, they might remember your name later on, or they may recommend you to another faculty member. The second thing I wish I had done is network more. When students hear the word networking, they often imagine the cliche business executives exchanging business cards, but networking is much simpler than that. It simply means building genuine relationships with people, talking to professors after class, introducing yourself to guest speakers, getting to know graduate students, connecting with professionals during these internships. These relationships often lead to opportunities that you would never find online. Many internships, research positions, and recommendations happen because someone already knows your work ethic and trusts you. Finally, I wish I had applied for opportunities even when I didn't think I was qualified. I think this is something many students struggle with. We read the requirements for a scholarship, internship, or any leadership position and immediately convince ourselves that someone else is more qualified, so we don't even try to apply. But something I've learned is that sometimes the admissions committees or employer sees potential in you before you see it in yourself. If you don't apply, you've already guaranteed the answer is no. If you do apply, you at least give yourself a chance. So, looking back, some of my biggest opportunities happened because I decided to apply even though I wasn't completely confident in myself. So, throughout my undergraduate education, I started noticing certain patterns among students who consistently earned competitive opportunities. These weren't necessarily the students with the highest GPAs. Instead, they tended to share similar habits. First, they emailed professors regularly, not to ask for any favors, but because they were genuinely curious about the research and the class material. They asked questions about class because they wanted to learn more. Second, they attended office hours, and many students see office hours as something you only use if you're struggling academically. But office hours are actually one of the easiest ways to build relationships with faculty members. Professors get to know your personality, your interest, and your goals, and that makes it much easier for them to write a detailed recommendation letter later on. Another thing I noticed was that these students volunteered for research whenever opportunities became available. They understood that learning outside the classroom was just as valuable as learning inside of it. They also weren't afraid to ask questions. Sometimes students worry that asking questions makes them look less intelligent, but in reality, thoughtful questions usually show curiosity and engagement. Finally, and I think this is one of the biggest differences, they applied for opportunities before they felt ready. As previously mentioned, whether it was scholarships, internships, research positions, or leadership roles, they didn't wait until they thought they were the perfect candidates. They understood that growth often happened because you accept challenges, not because you wait patiently until you're an expert. And over time, I realized that successful students weren't necessarily smarter than everyone else. They were simply more willing to put themselves in situations where opportunities could find them. Now, I'd like to about something specifically that I've noticed while teaching here at the University of Zambia. One thing that I've learned is that opportunities look very different depending on where you study. When I was an undergraduate student in the US, there were many organized student clubs, research labs, funded internships, career fairs, and campus resources. Here at UNZA, I've noticed that some of those opportunities are more limited. There may be fewer organized clubs, research opportunities can be harder to find, funding may be limited, and some campus resources simply aren't available. And that's completely okay. Graduate admissions committees understand this, and they don't expect every applicant to have identical opportunities. Instead, they ask a different question. What did this student do with the opportunities that were available to them? And it's a much fairer way to evaluate applicants. Someone attending a university with fewer resources can still build an incredibly competitive application by making the most of what's available. Admissions committees don't compare your universities to someone else's. They compare your achievements to the environment you were in. So if you're ever worried that your university doesn't offer enough opportunities, don't assume you're automatically at a disadvantage. Instead, ask yourself, am I maximizing the opportunities that I do have? That mindset makes a tremendous difference. So that brings us to a practical question. What can you actually do if your university doesn't offer the experiences you're looking for? Fortunately, there are many possibilities. Leadership doesn't only happen through student government. You might lead a ministry at your church. You may volunteer with a local community organization, work with a nonprofit organization, volunteer in a local clinic. You can tutor secondary school students. You can help manage your family's business, help one of your lecturers with their research, or even create your own initiative. One thing I've learned is that admissions committees really do appreciate initiative, and sometimes creating an opportunity is even more impressive than simply joining one. For example, maybe there isn't a mental health awareness club on campus. Could you start one? Maybe there isn't a tutoring program for local schools. Can you be the person to organize one? Maybe there aren't many leadership positions available, but could you create a project that solves a problem in your community? And today, online platforms have made it a lot easier to continue developing yourself if you have access to internet. There are free online courses, virtual conferences, professional webinars, research seminars, international networking events, and these experiences may not replace in-person opportunities, but they demonstrate curiosity and a commitment to lifelong learning. The question I'd like everyone to leave the section with is the one on the side of the slide. If your university doesn't offer the opportunity you want, What could you create instead? And I think that's one of the most powerful questions any student can ask themselves. So now that we've talked about why extracurricular activities matter, what types of extra experiences graduate schools value, and some practical ways you can begin building your profile, the final question becomes how do you combine all of those experiences into a competitive graduate school application? I think one of the biggest mistakes students make is treating every extracurricular activity as a separate accomplishment. Instead, I encourage you to think about your application as one story. Every strong graduate school application tells one story. And before choosing your activities, ask yourself a few questions. What field do I want to study? Why am I passionate about it? What experiences have helped shape that passion? And which opportunities will help me continue growing? When you answer those questions honestly, choosing extracurricular activities becomes much easier. So instead of joining organizations randomly, you'll naturally start selecting experiences that move you towards your long-term goals. For example, if you know you want to work in public health, then volunteering at a clinic, joining a health-focused nonprofit organization, assisting with research, and organizing community health campaigns all reinforce one another. If you're interested in education, tutoring students, mentoring young learners, assisting professors, and teaching workshops all strengthen that story. Your experience should not compete with each other, they should build on each other. Everything should connect to your story. Here is a simple example. Let's imagine someone applying to graduate school in behavioral health, such as myself. What kinds of experiences might support that application? Perhaps they've worked in a psychology research lab. Maybe they volunteered with a mental health organization. They've served as a peer counselor. They've been a teaching assistant for psychology courses. Notice how every one of these experiences point in the same direction. They're all connected. When an admissions committee reviews that application, they immediately understand the applicant's interest and long-term goals. Then ask yourself the question at the side of the slide. Why should we invest in you? Graduate school is a major investment. Universities invest faculty time, research funding, scholarships, lab space, mentorship, and they're looking for applicants who demonstrate that they'll make good use of those opportunities. Every activity you include in your application should help you answer that one question. Why are you someone worth investing in? Students often ask me how many extracurriculars they should have, and the truth is, there is no one magic number. Let's compare two hypothetical applicants. Applicant A joins 15 different organizations, however, they rarely attend meetings, never held any leadership positions, and didn't contribute very much. Applicant B spent 3 years working with one nonprofit organization. During that time, they became a project leader. Eventually, they created a new initiative that benefited the community. So, which applicant seems more impressive? For most admissions committees, it's applicant B. Why? Because commitment demonstrates something that short-term participation cannot. It shows consistency, responsibility, leadership, personal growth. Graduate schools would much rather see meaningful involvement in a few activities than superficial participation in many. So don't worry about filling your resume. Focus on making genuine contributions whenever you're involved. One thing admissions committees love to see is progression. Growth tells the story. So imagine someone who joins an organization during their first year as a volunteer. The following year, they become a regular team member. Later, they coordinate projects, and finally, they become president of that organization. That progression demonstrates much more than simply holding a leadership title. It shows that other people trusted them. It shows that they continued investing their time. It shows they developed new skills over several years, and that growth also demonstrates resilience. Very few people become leaders immediately. Leadership usually develops gradually through experience, mistakes, feedback, and persistence. So, when admissions committees see progression, they see evidence that you're someone who continues learning rather than remaining comfortable. And that's exactly the type of student graduate programs want. And finally, let's talk about something many students overlook. When describing your experiences, don't simply tell admissions committees what you did, show them the impact you made. For example, instead of writing, I volunteered, you could write, I mentored 30 secondary school students, or organized a community health campaign, or helped raise 15,000 kwacha, or founded a literacy club, or reached more than 500 community members. There is a huge difference in the phrasing. The second examples that I gave provided measurable evidence. They show outcomes rather than participation. So, whenever possible, try to quantify your accomplishments. How many people? How many hours? How much money? How many workshops? How many participants? Specific numbers help admissions committees understand the significance of your contributions. Impact always tells a stronger story than simply listing your responsibilities. So, after everything we've discussed today, you might be wondering where to begin. The good news is that you don't need to change your entire life tomorrow, and building a strong graduate school profile happens gradually. You might begin by volunteering with one organization or asking one professor if they need research assistance. You could join one student organization. You could find a mentor. You could attend one professional conference, complete an online certification, start one small community project, and all of these small actions repeated consistently over time become meaningful experiences. Remember, graduate school applications aren't built during your final semester. They're built throughout your whole university journey. So every semester gives you another opportunity to learn, contribute, and to grow. So we've reached the end of today's presentation. I've hoped you come away with one important message, and it's that graduate schools aren't simply looking for students with excellent grades. They're looking for future professionals, researchers, educators, clinicians, and leaders. Your extracurricular activities are one of the best ways to demonstrate your initiative, your commitment, your growth, and the impact you've already begun to make. So, no matter where you study or what resources are available to you, there are always opportunities to continue developing yourself. Sometimes those opportunities already exist, and sometimes you'll have to create them yourself. So, either way, every meaningful experience helps build the story of who you are. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen today. I truly appreciate your attention, and I hope something we've discussed today helps you as you begin thinking about graduate school and your future career. If you have any questions or if you'd like advice about graduate school applications, research opportunities, scholarships, or studying abroad, I'd be more than happy to talk with you. My contact information is here on the screen, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again, and I wish you all the very best in your academic and professional journeys.